25 years ago, a small publisher released a novel by a former press officer for the Central Electricity Generating Board. But although the author knew about sudden releases of power, he had no idea what he was unleashing here. The book, The Colour of Magic, began the Discworld series, Terry Pratchett's fantasy set in an alternative universe consisting of a sphere carried through space by 4 elephants standing on the back of a turtle. A quarter of a century later, this fantasy has sold 55 million copies, although Silver Jubilee celebrations have been slightly dampened by Pratchett's revelation that he's been diagnosed with the brain disease posterior cortical atrophy, a variant of Alzheimer's. The books, though, continue, although the latest is not an extension of Discworld, but a separate tale called Nation, in which a young boy called Mao, who lives on a sort of Pacific island in a kind of 19th century, wakes up one morning to find that his world has been washed away by a giant wave. But Terry Pratchett explained he was not inspired by the 2004 tsunami.
I actually had the idea some years ago, and I was talking to Sarah Lefanu at an event, and I told her I had the original image of a boy and a tidal wave hitting his island. And I was quite glad I told her, because she's my living witness to the fact that...
It's pre-tsunami.
Yes, it was. And also, of course, a long time post-Krakatoa, which in fact it more closely resembles. And I didn't write it soon after the big tsunami, because I thought, hang on, that would look like opportunism. And then after a while, the book was really, really dying to be written. And I thought, well, you know, big waves happen and have always happened. And this is clearly, as it were, a Krakatoa wave. And I thought, what the hell, I'm going to do this. And it is a harrowing book at the beginning for a children's book.
It is, because he thinks that the world has ended. And what's very striking is that it's pre 24-hour news. I mean, these days, if something terrible happens and you survive it, you know what has happened. Now, he has no idea what has happened, which is the distinction, isn't it?
A slight correction, I think, is that for him the world has ended. There are other islands that he knows about. He doesn't know that they're still above the waterline. And everybody he knows is dead. And you can't sugar that in any way. And I sort of had a long discussion with myself about it. But no, I thought I want to make this, to an extent at least, something that could be a true story.
So the long discussion with yourself was about whether it was too distressing for younger readers.
I think younger readers can cope with that sort of thing. They can certainly cope with it in the context of a book. That's the marvellous thing about reading. There's been a lot of talk about banding of books, and you know, putting something on the book saying suitable for a 9-year-old, which is rather silly, really, because it depends entirely on the 9-year-old. Some 9-year-olds will be reading James Bond. I remember when The Amazing Morris came out, an American mother wrote to me and said that she was so frightened by one scene that she was worried about her 7-year-old daughter, who was sitting there quite happy, and the girl apparently patted her on the knee and said, "Don't mind, Mum, it will be all right in the end." Because she had faith in the narrator. Because you know very well, if you start out in darkness, which is how the novel does, you have to end up in light.
Without giving too much away, the verb believed is used at a crucial point in this book, and belief as a noun. You have, for some time, been proudly declared on the British Humanist Society website. It seems to be a more religious book, this one.
You have to remember that humanism was not initially the same as atheism. And we live in a smorgasbord culture now, in any case. As far as I'm concerned, God is immaterial in 2 respects of the word. We do our best we can for our fellow man. That is it. That's the sacrament. It carries with it the benefit that any God worth believing in would automatically accept that as a pretty good thing to do.
But there does seem, and this is partly because it's been reported in the newspapers, some kind of experience or sensation that you had. There does seem to have been a shift in you, in your attitude to
it. A shift
religion.
in me in the sense of I heard my father talking to me when I was in the garden one day. But I am absolutely certain that what I heard was my memories of my father, an engram or something in my head. If all the memories you have of a parent were assembled in some kind of 3-dimensional way, you would have a pretty good idea, you know, the way my father acted about things, felt about things, you know. It helps when I look into the mirror, I see my dad. when I'm angry and the way I think and the way I walk, I see my dad. When I go to the toilet twice every night, I see my dad because he was kind enough to will me his bladder. So you have all these things. So in a sense, almost, in some situations, it's as if I'm a gramophone that plays the recording of my dad. And I said, I think in an article I did, that this is not about God, but this is somewhere around there is where God's come from. We paint the universe with memories and desires. And somewhere out of that comes E equals MC squared. Somewhere out of that comes whatever God you want to believe in.
There is, as you're probably well aware, for readers of your books now, there is this sense of fragility about the books, because you've always been an unstoppable writer, or seem to be, and since you spoke about your illness, I mean,
the word is Alzheimer's, I think we're avoiding.
Alzheimer's, yeah.
Actually, it is PCA, which is a slightly different version. I get into trouble for using the wrong one.
Well, no, that's why I didn't say Alzheimer's, but yours is
it's got the same pathology, but the thing is, as you can see, I'm totally incoherent and can't hold a conversation. But no change there then. There's a different order in which it affects the parts of the brain.
But what I was saying is that, I mean, you're presumably aware of this. We read your books wondering if it's going to have any effect at any point on the books. Now, I don't think as a reader it has at all here, but you start off writing these books presumably apprehensive.
My memory is rather bad. My typing is extremely bad now. But a certain amount of technology can help you around that sort of thing, and you remain fairly glib.
But I also wondered, because confidence is very important to writing, isn't it? I mean, if you start to think, oh, I don't think I can do this, I don't think it's going to work, then it can become self-fulfilling. So you have to sit down at the word processor in the same state of mind, if you can.
I have no difficulty whatsoever in plotting, characterization, assembling the dialogue. None whatsoever. Whether I shall, when in the fullness of time, but how soon that's going to hit me, I do not know. And no one will give me any kind of answer, and I'm not particularly certain I want one in any case.
I was going to say, but that's what you have to be careful about, that if you suddenly found yourself having difficulty in a paragraph, you have to avoid thinking it's because of the illness. You have to think, I may have had difficulty in this paragraph 10, 20 years ago.
We did an experiment one day. I sat my PA down and I dictated to him 2,000 words of the novel. And it needed editing. It needed editing because I'm not particularly up on dictation. As you may know, it's always easy to be overblown when you're dictating. I think it's probably because subconsciously you don't want to type all these words. But it was certainly all there, and it would not have been difficult to edit it. But I actually prefer, even with the slowness of my typing now, to travel at that speed, because authors always type by fits and starts in any case. And we have, of course, the spell checker, which I didn't used to rely on. And I know when something happens that it's not me. So if I suddenly don't know how to spell wood, like he would do this, and it goes, and you think, yes, I know that one. Okay, well, let's have a jolly good go. And then as soon as I see the spell checker put it up, whatever little obstruction would cause that goes. It's very strange.
I mean, Discworld perhaps more than for most writers, because it's such a huge construction, and so many books now, that memory is very important to it. You need to hold all this stuff.
I've got plenty of fans who can remember like anybody's business. And I make notes, and I phone people up and just check things. I mean, the difficulty is, when I was talking to various people during diagnosis, I said, you've got to remember that I hallucinate gently for a living. That Alzheimer's has not come as a major shock to me, because it seems almost a kind of extension of the way I live. Because as an author, you get totally focused on a book. You walk around all the time with that book hovering almost in the corner of your vision, and I can actually go back to a sentence that I was halfway through and pick it up again. It's an interesting fact that while I'm pleased that I stood up and said I've got the disease, and it never occurred to me not to. But as you know, the 25th anniversary is not hugely being celebrated. One national newspaper wanted to do an article about the book, but wanted to do it in their health supplement. And I said no. And there were a couple of other things, and I said, hang on a minute, guys, this is about a book, You've had all your fun, as it were, 6, 7, 8 months ago. Why go through it again? Is it a good book? Is it a bad book? Then, if it's a good book, it doesn't matter what kind of disease the author's got.
What I wonder, though, which is connected to the writing, as I've tried to make these questions...
I know I'm not going to leave you away from it.
No, it's about the writing. I read something that Ronald Reagan wrote in his diaries about the desire to get it all down before... there's a phrase about going into the darkness or something. But anyway, getting it all down, and he's just writing diaries. Now, you've told stories for so long now.
Oh, yeah.
Does it make you want to speed up as a writer?
Yes, I suppose it does. And to get myself to sleep at nights, I write my... autobiography, but usually by the time I'm 17 I'm so bored I fall asleep. And I realise that actually I haven't really done anything that merits autobiography, since I certainly haven't been on Big Brother. So I think that one will probably...
So you won't write it, you think?
For the last 25 years at least, I've concentrated on writing books, and when I wasn't writing books I was touring books. And there's probably just a limited amount of stuff in all that. I mean, there are plenty of anecdotes, and I can remember all of those. There are other things I'd rather do. As Death says to Mao in the book, there is what happens and what does not happen, and there are no bargains. But I hope Does Not Happen goes on long enough for a couple more books.
Terry Pratchett. Nation is published in hardback next week.